And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Apollo 13 is a very fascinating story. I mean, it's an actual historical event where the rocket ship went out into space to go to the moon. There was an error, and yet thanks to some very brilliant scientists and engineers, we were able to bring them back home safely. But it could have ended in complete and utter disaster. There's been a very popular movie based on the subject. It did certainly, unfortunately, even though it was an unfortunate event, brought a lot of interest to the space program once again. And the fact is that it's just really a fascinating thing, and I think it's a great theme for a game. This is a cooperative game in which players will be working together to bring home the astronauts. Let's see how it plays. To win the game, you have to travel through 7 events. You have to get each event finished. The way you'll do that is at the beginning of each turn, players will turn over a history card from this deck, and the decks are lettered A, B, C, D, E, F, G, although decks B and G are actually split into G1 and G2, so you'll shuffle the G1s and put them on top of the G2s. In the bottom half of each deck, you shuffle one card that says event, and when that happens, you will draw the event card and do whatever that event card says. So if you make it to event G, you win the game. All right, this means that you've successfully brought them back to Earth. To lose, on the other hand, you have different tracks over here. Now, each of these tracks represents the physical and mental status of the different astronauts and the rocket status and the mission control. And so as the game goes by, these are going to be moving upwards. When they move past this orange line, they're going to move the mission status as a whole, which is this track down here. And when this gets to failed, you will lose. If these get up here to the red, for example, and I need to move it up 2 more, I can't. So instead, I'll move the mission status over 2 on the bottom. We also have flight and energy paths, and sometimes these can be spent to reduce what happens here. So the first thing you do on your turn is you draw the top card from your deck. So I look at this card, and it tells me kind of a story of what's happening, simulations and training, and gives you a little bit here, preparing for this. And then it shows that all the astronauts are going to go up 1 in both the mental and physical health. So these all move up by 1. All right, so that's kind of like a bad thing that happens on my turn. Then I have 1. Then I will draw a card from a deck, and all players will start with these cards that they draw. And then you have an action that you can take. Now, one of the actions you can take is simply to pick a cube and move it down 1. But you're probably better off playing a card. There's different cards to be played, but you'll see these cards have letters, which means this card can only be played when I'm in deck C. This one can only be played when I'm in deck B2. This one here can be played in deck A, and it will bring down the mission control by 2 if I play this card. I can also discard a card if it's part of the mission section that I'm in on the proper side, on one of the 2 sides, and if there's enough cards on one of the sides, I can discard those to move any 2 cubes down. Also, instead of moving a cube down, I can move my flight or energy up, because some of the cards have on them the words energy, and when that happens, that lets you reduce the negative things that happen there. Now, sometimes when you have an event card turnover, that card itself will have a track, and then you're going to have to follow the instructions to move the cube on that track before you can go to the next event, or sometimes negative things will happen. Now, occasionally there will be cards and different things that allow players to draw an Apollo token. Now, these Apollo tokens have numbers on the back, which means nothing unless you're playing competitively, at which at the end of the game, whoever has the highest amount of numbers, these are from 1 to 3, wins. But you can also spend these to play cards out of turn. So maybe it's someone else's turn and they're an A, and I'm like, ooh, well, I have the A card. Or this card here, which can only be played when a specific card B2-1 comes up. I might have that when B-2 comes up, and if I can spend one of these tokens, I can do that. In fact, I can play more than one card on my turn, but I have to discard another card for my hand. So you always will draw a card in your turn, but you also can move a cube, play a card, put a card here next to one of the 2 sides, or draw an extra card. And so this will continue on as players are basically moving from deck to deck here. and eventually getting to the end or losing the mission status down here at the bottom. And that's how you play and win or lose together as a team. Hey folks, real quick before I get to my final thoughts, I didn't mention in the overview about a timer. When you get into the last sections of the game, a timer is flipped over, and you either, for a while, you flip over the timer twice, and then as things get worse, you have the timer once, and that's how much time you have to complete your turn, which is slightly stressful, although since your choices are usually pretty obvious, not dramatically stressful, but it's kind of to give this sense of time running out. I didn't really like the addition of the timer, but I didn't really hate it either. Let's see what I think about the game now. The game also comes with a bunch of alternate history events, so you don't have to use the actual events that are in the game. So that first event which I showed you, in which the different astronauts things go up, this one here will have different levels go up. It's basically something else happening in history. I don't actually know what the other thing happening in history is. I just know that different track levels move up. Now, I was really excited about the theme going into this. Like I said, this is a really cool theme, this space theme, this historical flavor. And I think the game has some redeeming qualities in the fact that if you want to teach somebody about this mission, this game is going to do a really good job of that. The events on the cards and everything unfolds very similar to what happened in history. And while that's an excellent way to teach people history, and that's a cool thing of the game, it's also the game's biggest problem, and that's that by far, more than any cooperative or competitive game I think I've ever seen, this game is so scripted that I just can't imagine most people having fun with it. Certainly I did not. You literally have to play the right things at the right time or it does not work. And this isn't like, oh, a hard decision. It's like, oh, it's B2, but I don't have any B2 cards in my hand. Oh, I have one now, but we're in C. Oh, it is B2 and I have a B2 card in my hand. I guess I should play that card. And it's just... The fact that they made 7 different decks and you have 7 different cards that only work when that deck is in play, and 2 of those decks are split into 2 halves, so there's really 9 different decks of cards that have to be in play at any given time, makes this game incredibly frustrating to play. Sure, you can win the game, but you just really got to get kind of lucky with the card draws. The game says for your first game you should draw 2. When you draw cards, you should draw 2 and keep 1. Why would you change that when you get to expert gaming? Is it because more randomness makes the game fun? The game is incredibly random. Because the game is so scripted, because the game follows such a narrow linear path, if you draw the right cards at the right time, you're going to win. If you draw the wrong cards at the wrong time, you're going to lose. I really looked at the different ways. I'm like, well, how can you play differently? When you get your cards in your hand, you're like, oh, I have a card that matches this one. Should I play it? Well, yes. And if you can't play it, should I set it aside so we can use it later? Probably. It's not like there's a lot of tough decisions. Every once in a while, you're like, hey, I got 2 cards this time that work with this era. Ah! And these Apollo tokens, which are great, and you can use them, you have to kind of work to get them. You don't get them at the very beginning, so the mission's already kind of spiraling out of control. I know the Apollo 13 mission, there was problems with it, and it was very fortunate they brought it back, but in this one it feels like that, it's not, but it feels like the thing's blowing up, and there's aliens attacking. It just has this feeling like, oh, everything's going wrong, and what can we do to stop it? I can move these things down this track. And it's taking out aside the very straitjacket of how the game forces you to be. The game itself is just not that interesting. Move up some pieces of track, move them down one. Now, if you read all the different text out loud, the historical background could be cool, but how many times is that going to be worth it? Now, this isn't the first time from this designer. I felt the same way about one of his previous games about the flight to the moon, and I was like, wow, this is a really cool game, but you know what? The second time we play through, it's the same as the first time and the third time, and this has that exact same problem. You might have fun playing this once. In fact, you might have fun playing this until you beat it, I guess, because once you beat something, then it's... maybe like I guess you could compare it to a video game once you beat it, but the journey to get there is just not that interesting. Look, I'm all for theme and I'm all for fluff, and I'll read the cards out loud, you know. NASA does not understand why the Aquarius does not respond to commands. Procedures must be rechecked. But then it's like, this card only takes effects if Aquarius loses control is already in play. Otherwise, insert this card into the deck below the next history card. So there's this constant, this only works here. And there were cards that you can draw that can only be played at a very specific time, and you can literally draw them on the turn after that card has shown up. I've seen it happen. Artwork is fine. The board itself with the cubes is a little kind of funky to look at, but it's cool. I like looking at, ooh, that's the control room of the tower. And the pieces are fine, even though they have things like the moon and the earth, which really don't do anything for the game. They don't mean anything. You have a spaceship token too, and that's simply just to show who goes first. The game is not complex. It's pretty easy to play, but there's just no bite, there's no power. So I'm going to have to give this one a pass. I really want to like it, but I want to have some meaningful choices in my games, and they certainly aren't evident here. Dice Tower Judgment, too scripted.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
Shut the door!